And now coming up next is Ghost Beach. Up next we have Vampire Breath. So Freddy and Kara go back from babysitting and they go to Freddy's basement and they find a hidden doorway behind a cabinet. And then they say, "Wow, let's check it out." They go down this tunnel and then they find a coffin at the end of it. And there's a bottle that's labeled Vampire Breath. And the lore of Vampire Breath to me is a little bit confusing. They open the Vampire Breath and Count Nightwing, the vampire, he rises out of this coffin. There's a really, honestly, very terrifying scene where Count Nightwing is chasing after them down this tunnel. And they realize that the door is locked and they can't escape. They're locked in with this vampire who keeps on talking about how thirsty he is, how much he wants to drink their blood. And so Count Nightwing doesn't have his fangs. And so the vampire breath apparently can also store the vampire's memory. I think that the lore of vampire breath is a little bit confusing. It seems like nobody really knows exactly what it's supposed to do or exactly what the limits of its powers are. It can hold memory, it can teleport the vampires, it can do all sorts of things. It's just a little bit strange. After Count Nightwing chases them down the dark tunnel, then we find he doesn't have his fangs, and he needs the vampire breath to restore his memory to know where he left his fangs. They say, "Okay, we'll help you find it as long as you let us go." So they are looking for the vampire breath, and they find the bottle of vampire breath again, and it takes Count Nightwing and accidentally takes the kids also back to Count Nightwing's castle. And I would say this is where the book really shines, is for these middle to kind of the middle end-ish chapters where the kids are in Count Nightwing's castle. So they are looking for the vampire breath. They say, "We need to find it before he does, and then hopefully it'll take us back to our own house." And they run into this girl Gwendolyn in the castle, and she offers to help them. The vampires there have enslaved her, and she needs to get away too. They look around for a while. They run into Count Nightwing once or twice. They eventually find this pantry sort of thing full of vampire breath. Bottles upon bottles upon bottles. And then they find out that a lot of them, in fact almost all of them, are empty. And so then Gwendolyn reveals that she's also a vampire looking for the vampire breath for her own purposes. As a vampire, she tries to drink the blood of the two kids, Freddy and Kara. And so really, really suspenseful, really, really great atmosphere in the book. They eventually do find the vampire breath, and they get transported back to their own house. Count Nightwing with them. Count Nightwing remembers where he put his fangs, and they were in a bathroom in Freddy's house that they never use. Just sitting there. Freddy's parents come home. They say, "Oh, Father, you're back." And so then the twist is that Count Nightwing is Freddy's grandfather, or at least the first twist. Soon after this twist ending, there's another, I guess, twist ending. Kara finds a bottle of werewolf sweat. They spill it on themselves, and then they start to growl like werewolves. And then that's it. So the book, it has very good atmosphere. It has, like I said, that scene where Count Nightwing is chasing them down the tunnel. That honestly was like a very, very tense moment in this book, and it's pretty well written, I gotta say. I do kind of hold it against the book, like Count Nightwing losing his fangs. Like, that just seems pretty stupid to me. It doesn't really hurt the book, at least not for very long. It's actually quite a good story. Up next is How to Kill a Monster. So these two kids, Gretchen and Clark, visiting their grandparents who live out in the middle of a swamp. Unbeknownst to them, they have a monster trapped upstairs. Their grandma keeps on baking way more pancakes than they'll ever need. And again, unbeknownst to the reader, it's to feed the monster, keep him happy, I guess. Really, it just builds atmosphere for the first maybe half of the book. And then in the second half, the grandparents have to leave in order to get someone to help them with the monster. So they go to the police station after they get their car fixed. But once they get their car fixed, then Grandma and Grandpa, they're off to get the police. Or at least somebody to help. There they go. Gretchen and Clark are alone in the house with this monster. They let the monster out. Then what follows is actually pretty intense scariness, where they're trying to run away from the monster is chasing them, the monster is attacking them, and they think, we need to kill this thing. How are we going to do it? And so they devise a plan that they're going to take one of Grandma Rose's pies, and they say, we're going to poison it and feed it to this monster. So they grab a rhubarb pie and they pour things like rat poison, turpentine, ammonia, drain cleaner, and all these dangerous things, all these things that are toxic to ingest. They pour them into the pie, and then they wait. They wait because they know that the monster is going to come to eat this pie. The monster comes and eats it, and he starts staggering a little bit, and then he falls to the floor. And so they try to throw out the monster, and they find out that the monster isn't really dead. And so then again, the monster, it rises up and it starts to try to attack them again. And it gets pretty scary. It talks about how the monster got Gretchen and is putting her head into his mouth, and he's about to eat her. But then, just in the nick of time, before the monster can clamp his jaws around her, he talks to her. He's like, are you a human? Gretchen says, yeah. And then he says, oh, I'm allergic to humans. And then the monster, he really dies. And so I guess that's how to kill a monster, is by being human. They go back to the house. They try to go back to the house. And they remember a second note. Because the grandparents, before they left a note that said, oh, hey, we need to get help. Just keep the door locked. They say, oh, wait a minute. There's a second note that we never got to read. So they open it, and it says that if they kill the monster, then they shouldn't go out to the swamp, which they already did. The monster is not alone. And so they hear monsters surrounding them and closing in on them. And then that's really the end of the book. So I really like this book because it gets pretty intense. The scariness to this book is pretty high. They're running away from a monster that really does intend to kill them. Just the feeling of isolation, being alone in the house, nobody is there to protect you, the helpless feeling of what are we going to do. This book is pretty solid. I like it. It can get a little goofy, as per Goosebumps protocol, with the whole I'm allergic to humans thing, but still, even that I found somewhat likable. But I think that this book is quite a good read. And now, next is It Came From Beneath the Sink. So this book, it's kind of simple. It's kind of a simple plot, but I think that this book was actually pretty engaging. I thought that the concept was really likable. A sponge that soaks up people's luck and leaves them with bad luck. Like I thought that was pretty creative, pretty cool. A lot of the bad luck honestly involves people being hurt. It's kind of intense with how they continue to fall off of their bikes or fall off of their ladders or just keep getting hurt by this thing, having crossed this bad luck where their garden dies. So much stuff happens. Yeah, it's a really simple to understand. The sponge that they find beneath the sink that's so evil is called a gruel, and it feeds off of the bad luck that it causes. And it has a cousin, which is basically an evil vampire potato called a lynx. And that's the twist ending, is that the dog killer brings one home and Cat grabs it and says, "What have you got?" And it turns out it's the lynx. And that's really the end of the book. And there's a lot more to this book than what I've just said. I kept it pretty simple because it is a simple book. And still, I liked it. I found it to be an engaging read. It's pretty well paced. The scares start off pretty early and they maintain their scariness throughout the book. And I think that it was really, really engaging. Pretty good book to me. Next up is How I Got My Shrunken Head. The book is about this kid, Mark, who receives a shrunken head really early in the book. Like it's the end of the first chapter when the head is presented. And I thought that with Goosebumps and its obsession with fake-out scares, or R.L.Stine and his obsession with fake-out scares, that it was going to be something completely different. And I was pleasantly surprised when it was, actually the head that was sitting at the door staring at him, and a woman named Carolyn who was giving it to him, saying, "This is a present from your Aunt Benna." I was pleasantly surprised. I thought that was quite a good turn of events. The pacing of the book is great. It follows Mark as he comes out to the island of Balladora looking for his aunt who's missing. It's not particularly a horror story. It honestly kind of feels like a kid version of Indiana Jones with magical powers. Kind of sounds weird to say that out loud, but it's kind of what it's like. He runs into like animals in the forest, like tigers. He runs into some quicksand, all these different things in the jungle. And he realizes that when he gets to Balladora, he's asking about his Aunt Benna, and Dr. Hollings, one of the doctors there, he is talking about how we need to find Benna. But it turns out that he is doing the opposite. Rather than trying to find Benna because he's worried about her, he wants to find Aunt Benna because she has the secret to this jungle magic that the book is about. And this whole concept of jungle magic, again, it's one of those things that I thought was kind of stupid and yet at the same time quite likable. I think that in the context of the book, it worked really well for itself. Dr. Hollings sends his daughter after Mark. Her name is Corrine. She follows him around and she's essentially spying on him. She's trying to learn how it is that Mark is able to use the magic, and she's going to report back to Dr. Hollings, her father. And it's quite an adventure. Mark eventually finds his aunt, and they're captured, brought back to the camp, and Dr. Hollings, he threatens to shrink Mark's head. And Aunt Benna, she doesn't have the jungle magic that Dr. Hollings is looking for. She doesn't have the secret because she gave it to Mark years ago, years before this book started. He's the one with the jungle magic, and so once they capture him, there's an issue there with Benna doesn't know whether to reveal the secret or save her nephew. And so, yeah, there's a lot that goes into this book. It has a very simple and yet still quite complex story. It has likable characters, It has a likable plot, and it's a pretty solid book. It's not particularly scary, apart from a few moments, but it gives the reader an adventure, I think. Coming up next, we have Let's Get Invisible. This book, I'm going to say right off the bat, has the most dark, the most scary, the most intense, the most hard-hitting ending in the whole Goosebumps original series. The ending to this book is so dark, like my heart sank when I read it. So it's about this kid Max, and he has a brother named Noah who's a lefty, so everyone calls him Lefty. They go upstairs, they find this mirror. They pull the string, and then Max just vanishes. And Lefty's kind of freaking out. He says, "Where did you go?" But he turned invisible because he flicked on the light switch above the mirror that he found. So this mirror, it makes people turn invisible. But not only that, as it makes people turn invisible, it also, I guess, opens a portal between the world of the reflection in the mirror and the real world. I imagine that's how it works. And so the reflections in the mirror are wanting to come into the real world. They're a more evil version of the person who is in the mirror. And so Max invites his friends over. Their names are Zach, Aaron, and April. And so they're trying to see who can stay invisible for the longest. They try to stay invisible. They stay invisible for a really long time. And when they reappear, they look different. Something is off about them. And of course, you know right away that they're reversed. They're reflected, like in a mirror. They force Max into the mirror, and then they force him to stay invisible long enough for his reflection to come out. There's a lot of really descriptive imagery about how it's feeling for them to stay invisible for that long, about how they feel uneasy, they feel sick, and it really can be quite creepy. Eventually, Max is able to escape, and the mirror is shattered. Lefty shatters the mirror, and so that all of their troubles are over. But then this is the really dark ending. I think that it's the most dark, intense ending in all of the original series of Goosebumps. So Max and Lefty go out and they want to play catch. And then Max looks over at Lefty and he's throwing right-handed. And that's the end of the book. I think that ending alone is why I rate this book so high, because it's scary, it's dark, and it's really intense. And so to see that in like a children's novel and to read that even as an adult, it's really, really intense. I might say that the middle is slower than it needs to be, but it's not slow to the point where it distracts from the book or it makes the book worse. It's okay with the pacing. All in all, I think it's a really good read.